Chapter 1: The Ice Speaks. The wind howled, a ravenous beast clawing at the corrugated metal of the research station. Inside, the fluorescent lights flickered, casting long, distorted shadows that danced with the swirling snow visible through the single, reinforced window. A window that was rapidly accumulating ice. It wasn't just any ice, either. It was growing, spreading like a malignant mold across the pane, obscuring the already bleak landscape with an unsettling, organic pattern. I hated this place. McMurdo Station, Antarctica. It was supposed to be the scientific gateway to the South Pole, a beacon of human intellect pushing back against the raw, untamed wilderness. Instead, it felt like a prison, a steel and concrete tomb perched on the edge of oblivion. My name is Dr. Alastair Fairbanks, and I am, or at least I was, a leading glaciologist. I came here seeking answers about the accelerating melt of the West Antarctic ice sheet. What I found. Well, that's a story I'm still struggling to comprehend, let alone articulate. The dripping, God, the incessant dripping. It echoed through the station, a metronome counting down to some unknown horror. It wasn't just water, it was something thicker, darker, with a metallic tang that clung to the air. The sound seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere, a phantom tormenting my already frayed nerves. There were 5 of us stationed here. Myself, Dr. Anya Sharma, a brilliant but perpetually anxious marine biologist. Ben Carter, a stoic engineer who seemed more at home with machines than people. Dr. Emily Chen, a bubbly, optimistic geologist whose cheerfulness was starting to grate on me. And Captain Eva Rostova, the station commander, a hardened woman with eyes that could freeze hell over. We were a team, ostensibly, but the isolation and the creeping dread had begun to erode the bonds that held us together. The initial scientific curiosity that brought us here has been replaced with a gnawing, primordial fear. Anya was the first to notice it. The anomaly. It started subtly with fluctuations in the ice core samples, unexplainable shifts in the isotopic ratios hinting at something ancient and wrong. Then came the seismic tremors, too regular to be natural, too deep to be explained by glacial movement. She was obsessed, poring over data with bloodshot eyes, muttering about things that didn't make sense, things that defied the laws of physics. "Alastair," she said one evening, her voice barely a whisper, pulling me aside in the mess hall. The aroma of synthetic protein stew, usually a comfort, now felt cloying, suffocating. "I need to show you something. It's not good." Her hands trembled as she fumbled with a data pad, her face illuminated by the harsh blue light. Ben watched us from across the room, his expression unreadable. Eva was nowhere to be seen. She was becoming increasingly reclusive, spending hours in her office, the door always locked. Emily was always trying to make jokes and laugh. No matter how hard she tried, her jokes were always the most unfunny thing in the world. The data Anya showed me was disturbing. It was a sonar scan of the subglacial lake beneath the ice sheet, Lake Vostok, a vast, hidden body of water that had been sealed off from the world for millions of years. There was something down there, something massive, something that shouldn't exist. It wasn't a geological formation. It had a definite, almost geometric structure. It was artificial. The images were hazy, distorted by the immense pressure and the murky water, but I could make out the unmistakable outline of something colossal, something impossibly large. "What is it?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "I don't know," Anya whispered, her eyes wide with terror, "but I think it's waking up." That was when the dreams started, vivid, unsettling nightmares that plagued me every time I closed my eyes. I would find myself standing on the edge of an abyss, the ground crumbling beneath my feet, the air filled with the stench of decay. A cold, alien presence would envelop me, whispering unintelligible words in my ear, words that resonated deep within my bones, words that felt ancient and malevolent. I would wake up screaming, drenched in sweat, the memory of the dreams clinging to me like a shroud. The others were experiencing similar phenomena. Emily, usually so cheerful, had become withdrawn, her eyes haunted by shadows. She claimed to hear voices in the wind, whispering her name, beckoning her to the ice. Ben, The stoic engineer was becoming increasingly paranoid, convinced that someone or something was tampering with the station's equipment. He started carrying a wrench everywhere, his knuckles white as he gripped it tightly. Eva, already withdrawn, had become completely unreachable, lost in her own private hell. The ice outside the window continued to grow, its intricate patterns resembling grotesque faces, leering at us from the frozen wasteland. The dripping intensified, a relentless, maddening rhythm that echoed the growing unease in my heart. The station felt smaller, the walls closing in, the air growing thick with a sense of impending doom. We were trapped, isolated, and utterly alone, and whatever was down there in the dark depths of Lake Vostok was about to break free. I had a dreadful feeling we had been brought here to do something we weren't aware of, to free something best left alone. One morning I found Anya missing from her bunk. Her bed was empty, the sheets neatly folded. Her data pad was gone. A chill ran down my spine, colder than the Antarctic ice. I knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that she had gone outside. She had answered the call. She had gone to meet whatever was waiting for us in the frozen darkness. I pulled on my parka, the heavy fabric feeling like a lead weight on my shoulders. Ben emerged from the engine room, his face grim. "She's gone, isn't she?" he said, his voice flat. "Yes," I replied. "We have to find her." He nodded, his eyes glinting with a strange, unsettling determination. "Then let's go." I looked at Ben, a sudden sense of dread washing over me. His eyes were not of a sane man. It was as if he already knew. He already knew what to expect. As we stepped out into the blinding white expanse, the wind howled like a banshee, carrying with it the faint, almost imperceptible whisper of a name. A name that resonated deep within my bones, a name that felt ancient and malevolent. Anya's name. The ice speaks, and we were about to hear its terrible truth. Chapter 2: Echoes in the White. The biting wind clawed at my exposed skin, turning my cheeks and nose a painful crimson. Visibility was near zero, a swirling vortex of white that erased the horizon and blurred the line between sky and ground. Ben led the way, his engineer's instincts guiding him through the blizzard. His heavy boots crunched rhythmically on the frozen surface, a lonely sound swallowed by the wind's incessant roar. "Anya," I shouted, my voice barely audible above the gale. The words were snatched away, lost in the vast emptiness. We had to find her, but I felt a sickening certainty that we were already too late. The ice, the wind, the very air itself seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. It was a feeling I'd never experienced before, an echo, perhaps, of the ancient horror beneath our feet. We followed the faint trail of Anya's footprints, disappearing and reappearing in the shifting snowdrifts. Each step was a battle against the elements, a desperate struggle for survival. We had to move fast. It was like the station was holding us, but it was the ice that called to us to be a part of its domain. After what felt like an eternity, Ben stopped abruptly, pointing towards a shimmering anomaly in the distance. It was a distortion in the air, a mirage that seemed to flicker and writhe like a living thing. As we approached, the mirage solidified, taking the form of a massive, crystalline structure embedded in the ice. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen. It was too perfect, too symmetrical to be a natural formation. What is that?" I stammered, my breath catching in my throat. Ben just shook his head, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and fascination. "I don't know, but it wasn't here yesterday." The structure was a labyrinth of ice, its surfaces reflecting the distorted light of the blizzard. There were tunnels, archways, and chambers that seemed to stretch into the frozen depths. The air around it was unnaturally still, a pocket of silence in the storm's fury. And emanating from within the structure was a low, resonant hum that vibrated in my very bones. We cautiously entered the crystalline maze, the entrance a gaping maw that seemed to swallow the light. The air inside was frigid, almost unbearable, but it was strangely clean. There was no sign of the metallic tang that had permeated the station, no hint of the putrid smell that haunted my dreams. But the hum was stronger here, resonating in the tight passageways, pressing against my eardrums. We moved slowly, our flashlights cutting through the oppressive darkness. The ice walls were smooth, almost polished, reflecting our lights in a dizzying display. There were strange markings etched into the walls, symbols that were both familiar and alien, hinting at a language I couldn't comprehend. "Anya," I called out, my voice echoing in the silent corridors. There was no reply, only the hum and the relentless drip, drip, drip of condensation forming on the ice. The feeling of being watched intensified. Then we found her, or rather what was left of her. In a large chamber, illuminated by an eerie internal glow, Anya was standing before a massive crystalline structure that resembled a giant obelisk. Her back was to us, her shoulders hunched, her head bowed. She was not moving, but I could see that her body was encased in ice, almost as if she was part of the structure. "Anya," I shouted, rushing towards her. Ben grabbed my arm, holding me back. "Don't," he warned, his voice tight with fear. "Something's not right." I ignored him, driven by a desperate need to reach her. As I got closer, I could see that her face was contorted in an expression of both terror and ecstasy. Her eyes were open, but they were no longer the eyes of Anya Sharma. They were vacant, lifeless, reflecting the eerie glow of the crystalline structure. I reached out to touch her, to break the ice and pull her free, but as my fingers brushed against the frozen surface, I felt a jolt of energy, a searing pain that shot through my body. The world swam, the sounds blurred and the hum intensified, filling my head with a cacophony of voices. "Join us. Become one. The ice remembers." The voices echoed, distorted and unintelligible, but the message was clear. The ice was calling. I saw a reflection of myself in the ice, and I knew that I had to break free before it got to me too. I stumbled back, gasping for air, my hand throbbing with pain. Ben pulled me away, his face pale. He knew what had happened. He could sense it. "We have to get out of here," he said urgently. "Now." We turned and ran, retracing our steps through the crystalline maze. But the maze had changed. The corridors had shifted, the tunnels had twisted, and the exit had vanished. We were lost, trapped in a labyrinth of ice, with something ancient and malevolent closing in. The hum intensified, the voices grew louder, and the ice walls began to pulse with a cold, internal light. The shadows danced, the dripping quickened, and the air grew thick with the stench of decay. We were being hunted, and the hunter was the ice itself. As we ran, I glanced back and saw something that made my blood run cold. The ice surrounding Anya was starting to spread, consuming the chamber, expanding outwards, reaching for us. It was growing, changing, becoming something alive. The ice spoke to me again, with no sound but a terrifying clarity. The ice was coming for us all. Chapter 3: The Architect of Fear. The crystalline structure pulsed with an unholy energy, its icy tendrils snaking out to ensnare us. We stumbled through the labyrinth, our flashlights barely piercing the oppressive darkness. The hum intensified, a deafening drone that vibrated in my bones, blurring the lines of reality. The cold was a physical presence, seeping into my clothing, numbing my limbs. Ben, his face a mask of grim determination, navigated the shifting corridors with a preternatural sense of direction. He was an engineer, a man of logic and reason, but I sensed a growing unease in him, a desperate struggle to maintain control. I could tell he was also being called. The ice was calling to us both, and I worried that we were already losing. We encountered the grotesque figures carved into the ice walls. The symbols became clearer, revealing a language that was both alien and eerily familiar, like a dream recalled with unsettling clarity. The carvings depicted a civilization that was both ancient and advanced, a culture that seemed to worship the ice itself. They were depicted as both conquerors and victims. We came upon a large chamber where a giant frozen figure stood. It had a humanoid form, but its features were distorted, its limbs elongated, its face a grotesque parody of human expression. Its eyes, two black voids, seemed to bore into our souls. As we approached, the figure began to thaw, the ice around it cracking and splintering, revealing the twisted flesh beneath. "It's evolving," Ben whispered, his voice laced with a mixture of fear and wonder. "Adapting." The figure lurched forward, its movements jerky and unnatural. It let out a sound, a guttural rasp that echoed through the chamber. It lunged, but Ben was quicker. He slammed his wrench into its body, and a spray of icy shards exploded outwards. The figure recoiled, but it didn't fall. It just kept coming. We fought our way past, the figure pursuing us as we ran. We were trapped in the bowels of a frozen god, a nightmare made real. We found a passage that seemed familiar, a path we thought we had taken before, only to realize it was the same. A chilling realization washed over me. The maze was a prison. We were being led, guided. This wasn't random, it was by design. As we ran, I began to understand. The structure was a living entity, an architect of fear. It could manipulate the environment, control the ice, and even influence our minds. It was drawing us deeper, preparing us for something terrible. We were being led to the center. The central chamber was a vast circular space, bathed in an ethereal blue light. In the center stood a massive crystalline core, its surface shimmering with an intricate network of veins like a living heart. The core pulsed with the same energy that emanated from the structure, the same energy that called to me, whispered in my dreams. It was the source, the origin, the heart of the ice. We were almost there. We were both near our breaking points, but then we heard a sound that snapped me back to the cold, cold reality. "Alistair, Ben." It was Emily. Her voice was faint, echoing from a tunnel leading out of the chamber. It was a beacon of hope in this frozen hell, a voice that cut through the oppressive hum, giving me a surge of adrenaline and then a wave of dread. Emily's voice. Why was she here? How did she get in? I knew from her cheerfulness that she had to come because of it. "Emily," I shouted, my voice hoarse. We ran towards the sound, through a narrow passageway that seemed to shrink with every step. At the end of the passage, we found her. She was standing at the entrance to another chamber, her face illuminated by the light. She was smiling. It was a serene, almost beatific expression that didn't fit the situation. She was holding something in her hands. A tool, some sort of surgical instrument. As she turned to face us, I saw that her eyes were blank, her pupils dilated. She was no longer Emily Chen. The ice had claimed her. "Welcome," she said, her voice a hollow echo. "The architect has been waiting for you." Then she raised the instrument and plunged it into her own chest. Blood gushed from the wound, staining the ice around her. But she didn't flinch, she didn't scream. She just smiled, her gaze fixed on the crystalline core. The room began to shake, the icy walls cracking and groaning under unseen forces. The hum intensified, the voices grew louder, and the crystalline core pulsed with a blinding light. "You are almost home," Emily whispered, before collapsing to the ground, her lifeblood staining the ice. Ben and I stood frozen, our minds reeling. We realized now what was expected, what we were meant to do. The chamber was filled with the scent of iron, the metallic tang, and the ice whispered to us, begging us to be a part of it. We are now the tools of the architect. Chapter 4: A Cold Awakening. The death of Emily, the orchestrated scene of self-mutilation, shattered whatever fragile grip I had on reality. The crystalline core pulsed with an almost unbearable intensity, radiating waves of cold that burrowed into my bones. The architect had set the stage, and we were now its unwilling players. Ben reacted differently. His stoicism cracked, replaced by a primal terror that manifested as a strange, almost manic energy. He gripped his wrench tighter, his knuckles white, his eyes darting around the chamber, searching for an escape that didn't exist. He seemed to be resisting the architect's call, fighting against the siren song of the ice. "We have to go," he said, his voice trembling. Before it's too late." But there was nowhere to go. The passage leading back to the maze had vanished, replaced by a solid wall of ice. The exit was closed. We were trapped, isolated, facing the crystalline core, the source of the impending terror. The hum intensified, the voices swirled around my head, their whispers becoming increasingly insistent, seductive, and inviting. It felt like a physical pressure, a relentless force that threatened to shatter my mind. "Join us. Embrace the cold. Become one with the ice." The words echoed, resonating within me, awakening a dormant part of my consciousness, a part that craved the isolation, the control, the power that the ice offered. I struggled against the insidious influence, fighting to maintain control, to resist the allure of the cold. I could feel my own body changing, the skin on my hands growing numb, a creeping sensation of ice forming within my veins. I looked at Ben, and he was fighting, his face a mask of defiant resolve, but I knew, with a growing sense of despair, that it would be a losing battle. The core began to emit a series of pulses, each one sending a wave of energy through the chamber, intensifying the cold and the voices. The energy was focused on us. It was choosing us. Ben was more than resisting, he was fighting back. As the core pulsed, my mind filled with a torrent of images, visions of frozen landscapes, of ancient civilizations, of beings made of ice and shadow. I saw the architect, a being of immense power and intellect, its form shifting and changing, its eyes burning with cold, calculating intelligence. I understood the architect's purpose. It wanted to assimilate, to expand, to transform the world into a frozen wasteland, a mirror of its own frozen existence. The architect wanted to make me a part of it. Suddenly, a new voice cut through the cacophony, a voice that was familiar. Eva's. I was shocked, and I didn't understand how she could still be present. "Alistair, fight it," the voice said, faint, distant, but real. "Don't let it take you." The voice was a spark of defiance, a flicker of resistance in the encroaching darkness. But where was she? I looked around. I saw a figure emerge from the ice. It was Eva, or at least a grotesque parody of her. Her skin was the color of ice, her eyes were black voids, her movements were jerky and unnatural, like a puppet controlled by invisible strings. Her face seemed frozen in horror, yet at the same time a disturbing serenity. She was the vessel. She was now part of the architect. "It is too late," she said, her voice a hollow echo, her gaze unwavering. "You cannot resist." The Eva form lunged at me, its icy hands reaching for my face. I screamed, dodging out of the way. Ben swung his wrench. The metal connected with the icy form, sending shards of ice flying. However, like the other figures, it didn't stop. The icy form just kept coming. The core pulsed again, and the chamber began to shake. The ground cracked, the ice walls splintered, and the crystalline core seemed to swell, growing larger, more imposing. The architect's influence was reaching its zenith. The end was coming for us. I closed my eyes, surrendering to the cold. I felt the ice creeping up my legs, up my torso, into my chest, constricting my heart, freezing my blood. The voices intensified, promising power, immortality, freedom from pain, freedom from the fear. Then suddenly, Ben was there. With a roar of defiance, he slammed the wrench into the crystalline core. A blinding light erupted, and the chamber was filled with a deafening crash. The core shattered, fragments of ice flying everywhere. The hum ceased, the voices fell silent, and the cold receded. The world exploded in a burst of icy shards. Then darkness. Chapter 5: A Glacial Graveyard. I awoke gasping, my lungs burning with the frigid air. The blinding light had vanished, replaced by a dim, ethereal glow emanating from the shattered remnants of the crystalline core. The chamber was in ruins, the ice walls cracked and broken, the air thick with a strange, crystalline dust. Ben was beside me, slumped against a jagged shard of ice. He was alive, but his face was pale, his body trembling. He had sustained injuries. The wrench lay at his feet, covered in a layer of shimmering ice. "Alistair," he said, his voice weak, did it work?" I looked around the chamber, assessing the damage. The core was destroyed, the architect's power seemingly broken. Eva's icy form had crumbled into shards. The icy tendrils were gone. The feeling of being watched had dissipated. The hum was gone. "I think so," I replied, my voice raspy. "I think we did." But as I said the words, a nagging feeling gnawed at me, a sense of incompleteness, of something not quite right. The silence was unsettling. The air was still, a stark contrast to the swirling chaos of the blizzard. I looked at Ben and I noticed a change in him. His eyes were clear, the terror gone, replaced by a strange, almost serene expression. He was no longer the stoic engineer. He was different. "We have to get out of here," he said, his voice calm, almost soothing. "The station, it's not safe anymore. We need to go. There is work yet to be done." I felt a surge of relief, but that nagging doubt returned, growing stronger. His words sounded familiar, echoing something I had heard or perhaps felt before. Was this the calm after the storm, or was it something more sinister? We stumbled out of the central chamber, making our way through the ruined labyrinth. The crystalline structure had been severely damaged, the corridors collapsing, the ice walls crumbling. The journey back was treacherous, a constant battle against falling debris and treacherous footing. But we were not pursued. The architect's influence was gone. We made our way to the surface. The blizzard had subsided, revealing a desolate landscape of ice and snow. The station was visible in the distance, a small, insignificant speck against the vastness of the Antarctic wilderness. As we walked, I tried to make sense of what had happened. Why had the architect targeted us? What was its purpose? What would have happened if Ben hadn't destroyed the core? Did it truly die? I realized that the questions were secondary. I knew, with a sickening certainty, that whatever we had done, it wasn't over. I understood that what we had unleashed was more than a threat. As we approached the station, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The ice. The ice that was growing, not on the window panes but on everything. The station was slowly, inexorably being consumed by ice. Walls, ceilings, and equipment were encased in a thick, crystalline layer. It was like the structure had been turned into an elaborate, frozen mausoleum. The ice grew, its patterns swirling with a nightmarish beauty. The outer doors had been shattered. The remaining members of our team were inside. As we entered the station, we found a scene of utter devastation. The lights were flickering, the power grid failing. The air was frigid, the sound of the wind, amplified by the empty corridors, echoing through the structure. We found the others in the mess hall. Emily was sitting at the table, her face pale, her eyes vacant. She was still alive, but she was different. She was staring blankly ahead, her hands resting on the table. Ben took my hand and led me to the table. The table was covered with ice, and in the center was a message written in blood. "The ice is waiting." Then I saw something else. There was a figure standing at the edge of the hall. It was Emily. It was also not Emily. The ice had changed her. Her skin was the color of ice, her eyes were black voids, her movements were jerky and unnatural. She smiled, a grotesque imitation of her former self. "Welcome back," she said, her voice a hollow echo. "The ice has come." I stared in horror, the full extent of the horror hitting me. It wasn't over. It was just beginning. Chapter 6: Mirrors of the Soul. The second Emily, the icy parody of the woman we knew, advanced slowly, her movements stiff and unnatural. It was like watching a puppet controlled by invisible strings, a grotesque mockery of humanity. Her hollow eyes locked onto mine, and a wave of nausea washed over me. It was the face of a nightmare, the embodiment of the cold terror that had gripped this place. What have you done?" I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. The icy Emily tilted her head, her smile widening, revealing teeth that seemed too sharp, too long. "We have brought order. We have brought peace. We have brought the cold." Then I looked closer at the Emily sitting blankly at the table, and I realized. It was Emily. It was Anya. She was facing toward another window, and she didn't look at all like Emily. She did look like a blank Anya. The horror clicked into place. The architect wasn't just a force, it was an ideology, a parasitic consciousness that sought to replicate itself, to assimilate everything in its path, transforming life into a cold, unfeeling reflection of its own existence. We hadn't destroyed it, we had simply disrupted its initial manifestation. It had just changed its tactics. It was now a virus, a disease spreading through the station, infecting the minds and bodies of those who remained. The true scope of the architect's ambition became clear: to change, to not only survive but to grow and thrive. The key was never destroying it but recognizing what we were fighting. "You think you've won," I said, my voice trembling but firm. "But you're wrong, we won't let you do this." The icy Emily laughed, a hollow, chilling sound that echoed through the mess hall. "You cannot stop what is coming, Dr. Fairbanks. The ice is inevitable. It will consume everything." Ben stepped forward, his wrench raised, his eyes filled with a cold fury. "I stopped it once. I can do it again." The icy Emily turned her attention to Ben, her smile fatting. "You are mistaken, engineer. You merely delayed the inevitable. And you are already one of us." The words hung in the air, heavy with a chilling implication. I looked at Ben, searching his face for any sign of corruption, any hint of the architect's influence. His expression was impassive, unreadable. "That's not true," I said, my voice rising. "Ben, you're still yourself, fight it." Ben didn't respond. He just stared at the icy Emily, his grip tightening on the wrench. The silence stretched, broken only by the flickering of the lights and the howling of the wind outside. Then he spoke. "I feel different," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "Stronger, clearer. It's like I can see things now that I couldn't see before." A wave of dread washed over me. The architect had already taken hold. He was no longer Ben. He was a puppet, a vessel for the architect's will. Ben was gone. Ben had become a mirror. The icy Emily smiled, her eyes glowing with a cold, triumphant light. "Welcome, brother," she said. "Welcome to the cold." Ben raised the wrench and turned to me. "I'm sorry, Alistair," he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "But this is the only way." He swung the wrench, aiming for my head. I ducked, the wrench whistling past my ear. I scrambled backwards, putting distance between myself and the corrupted Ben. He advanced slowly, relentlessly, his movements eerily precise, his eyes fixed on me with a chilling intensity. I was trapped, cornered, facing two monstrous reflections of the people I knew. It was like looking into a distorted mirror, seeing the darkness that lurked beneath the surface of humanity. It was a vision of my own potential for corruption, my own capacity for evil. What choice did I have? To run? To fight? To be one of them? How much would I have to give to survive? There was a banging sound. I turned to see that Eva, the real Eva, was coming. But what was she carrying? Chapter 7: The Shattered Reflection. The banging echoed through the mess hall, a chaotic counterpoint to the icy Emily's chilling serenity and Ben's emotionless advance. My eyes darted to the source of the noise. It was Eva, the real Eva, emerging from the shadows at the far end of the room. She was battered, bruised, and her face was streaked with grime and what I hoped wasn't blood, but her eyes burned with a fierce determination. She was wielding a fire axe. "Get down, Alistair," she roared, her voice raw with exertion. I didn't hesitate. I dropped to the floor just as Eva charged into the room, the fire axe arcing through the air. It connected with the icy Emily with a sickening crunch, shattering the frozen figure into a shower of icy shards. The icy Emily shrieked, a high-pitched, inhuman sound that sent shivers down my spine, before collapsing into a heap of glittering fragments. It was a beautiful destruction. Ben paused, his movements faltering. The destruction of the icy Emily seemed to have momentarily disrupted the architect's control over him. He blinked, his eyes flickering with a flicker of recognition, a spark of his former self. For a moment, just a moment, I saw Ben again. But then the icy resolve returned, his expression hardening, his grip tightening on the wrench. "Eva, what are you doing?" he said, his voice strained, as if fighting against an unseen force. Eva didn't answer. She just glared at him, her face a mask of grim determination. "I'm saving you, Ben," she said, "whether you want me to or not." She advanced towards him, the fire axe raised. Ben tensed, his body coiled like a spring. He knew what was coming, he was ready. Eva swung the axe, but at the last moment Ben moved, dodging the blow with an unnatural speed. He lunged forward, tackling Eva to the ground. The axe clattered across the floor, skidding to a halt near my feet. They wrestled on the floor, a desperate struggle for control. Eva was strong, but Ben was now infused with the architect's power, his movements swift and precise. The cold was a part of him. I scrambled to my feet, my mind racing. I had to do something. I couldn't just stand there and watch them kill each other. I glanced at the fire axe, then at the wrench. The axe was too heavy, too unwieldy for me. The wrench was the key. The wrench had damaged it before. I crept towards the wrench, my heart pounding in my chest. I reached for it, my fingers brushing against the cold metal. Then a hand clamped down on my wrist, stopping me in my tracks. I looked up. It was Anya. Her face was blank, her eyes vacant, her expression devoid of emotion. She was staring blankly ahead, a mere puppet for the architect. She was a monster. "You cannot interfere," she said, her voice a monotone. "The architect has plans for you." She pulled me towards her, her grip surprisingly strong. I struggled, but it was no use. I was no match for her. She was one of them. She now was part of it too. As Anya dragged me away, I saw Eva manage to break free of Ben's grip. She scrambled to her feet, grabbing a broken shard of ice from the floor. With a roar of fury, she plunged the shard into Ben's chest. Ben gasped, his eyes widening in shock. He stumbled backwards, his hand clutching at the shard protruding from his chest. The icy resolve faded, replaced by a look of pain and confusion, a look of regret. The architect relinquished him. Ben was Ben again. Then he collapsed to the ground, his lifeblood staining the ice around him. Eva stood over him, her chest heaving, her face streaked with tears. She had saved him, but at what cost? He was free, but was she safe? The cold surrounded the mess hall, and it wanted her to join it, and she might not have been strong enough to fight it anymore. "I'm sorry, Ben," she whispered. "I had no choice." I watched in horror as the light faded from Ben's eyes, as his body grew still, and he was claimed by the encroaching cold. Another life lost, another victim of the architect's relentless ambition. But there was no time for grief, no time for mourning. The cold was coming, and we had to fight back. The door crashed open, and another person tumbled into the room. It was Dr. Mallory, the last member of our team. He came crashing into the table that Anya was facing, the two of them tumbling together. He started to get up when Anya launched her icy fist into his face. He went down. He looked up to see that she was coming at him again. And this time, she had the shard of ice that Eva had used to kill Ben. She raised her hand and got ready to end him, but he grabbed her hand and twisted her arm. "I'm sorry it had to be this way." He grabbed the shard of ice, turned it around, and with all his might shoved it into her chest. She sputtered and she coughed, her body jerking, and in a moment she was still. The glazed look in her eyes disappeared, and there was sadness where it once was not. I then noticed that Mallory had a weapon as well. It looked like a grenade. This was it. We were ready to fight. The next move was ours. Chapter 8: Seeds of Ice. Mallory, breathing heavily, pulled himself to his feet, ignoring Anya's lifeless body sprawled on the floor. He clutched the grenade tightly in his hand, his knuckles white, his eyes darting around the room, assessing the threat. He was a man transformed, his initial fear replaced by a steely resolve. It wasn't the time for grief. It wasn't the time to think. It was the time to act. There was no other choice. "We can't stay here," he said, his voice gruff. "This place is compromised. We need to find a way to stop this thing." I nodded, my mind still reeling from the events that had unfolded. Eva, her face pale and drawn, rose from the floor beside Ben's body, her eyes filled with a mixture of grief and anger. She grabbed the fire axe, her grip firm. "Then let's get to it," she said, her voice laced with steel. "We owe them that much." We knew we had to move. As the three of us walked, what was left of it, Mallory reached into his coat and produced 2 more grenades. "Where did you get those?" asked Eva. "Doesn't matter," he said. "What matters is we use these to end it." We moved quickly, our movements synchronized, our senses heightened. The station was eerily silent, the only sound the howling wind outside. The flickering lights cast long, distorted shadows that danced with the growing ice, creating an atmosphere of paranoia and dread. Every corner seemed to harbor a threat, every shadow seemed to conceal a monster. As we moved, the station seemed to be shifting. Corridors that once led to familiar locations now twisted and turned, leading to dead ends or, worse, back to where we had started. The architect was still in control, manipulating the environment, trapping us in a frozen maze. I saw that everything was becoming ice. The floors, the walls, the equipment, the chairs, the table, it had all been turned to ice. The only thing that wasn't ice was us. Suddenly Mallory stopped, his hand raised. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. Eva and I strained our ears, listening intently. At first there was nothing but the wind. Then I heard it, a faint, rhythmic tapping coming from somewhere nearby. Tap, tap, tap. The sound was unnervingly familiar. It sounded like the ice on the walls, but there was something else to it. The sound felt almost intentional. We followed the sound, moving cautiously down a darkened corridor. The tapping grew louder, more insistent, leading us towards what appeared to be a storage room. We reached the door and stood to the side, our weapons raised. Mallory nodded, then kicked the door open. Inside, the room was filled with rows of shelves stacked high with supplies. Food, medicine, fuel, equipment, everything we needed to survive. But there was something else in the room. At the far end of the room, standing in the shadows, was a figure. It was hunched over, its back to us, its head bobbing rhythmically. The tapping was coming from it. As we approached, the figure turned to face us. It was Dr. Mallory, or rather another version of him. This one was ice. "You cannot stop what is coming," he said, his voice a hollow echo. "The architect has plans for this world." Then the icy Mallory raised its hand, revealing a small, crystalline object. It was a seed of ice, and with a flick of its wrist, the icy Mallory threw the seed towards us. Eva reacted instantly, swinging the fire axe, smashing the seed into 1,000 glittering fragments. But it was too late. A cloud of icy dust erupted from the shattered seed, swirling around us, enveloping us in a chilling embrace. I coughed, inhaling the icy dust. It felt like shards of glass in my lungs, burning my throat, numbing my mind. I staggered backwards, gasping for air, my vision blurring. Then everything went black. What I saw was a vision, a beautiful, terrifying vision, one of how the earth would look when we were gone. It was all ice. Everything had been reclaimed by the ice. There was nowhere to run, no place to hide. We were simply a moment in history that was meant to be forgotten. Had we just doomed ourselves, doomed the entire world? Was there anything we could do to stop the inevitable destruction? I don't know. Chapter 9: The Frozen Labyrinth. I gasped, sputtering for air. The vision receded, leaving behind a chilling residue, a lingering sense of dread. My lungs burned, my head pounded, and my body trembled with cold. I was lying on the floor of the storage room, surrounded by a glittering layer of icy dust. Above me, I could see Eva and Mallory, both struggling to their feet, their faces pale and contorted with pain. What was that? Mallory stammered, clutching his chest. I don't know, Eva said, her voice hoarse, but I don't like it. I pushed myself to my feet, fighting against the lingering effects of the icy dust. My mind felt clouded, my thoughts sluggish. It was like a cold fog had settled over my brain, making it difficult to concentrate, to think clearly. It was a seed, I said, my voice raspy. A seed of ice. It showed me a vision of what the architect wants to do to this world. Eva and Mallory exchanged a look of grim understanding. They had seen the vision too. The seed was now a part of us, I thought. We can't let that happen, Eva said, her voice firm. We will stop it, whatever the cost. We gathered ourselves, trying to shake off the effects of the icy dust. The storage room felt different now. The shelves seemed to leer, the shadows seemed to writhe, and the air was thick with a sense of malevolent anticipation. The icy Mallory was gone, its physical form destroyed, but its influence lingered, poisoning the atmosphere, corrupting the environment. As we looked around, a strange symbol was everywhere, written in frost. The architect was making itself known. As we turned to leave, I noticed something else: the supplies. The shelves were no longer stacked with food, medicine, and equipment. They were filled with ice sculptures, grotesque parodies of the items we needed: a frozen loaf of bread, a crystalline syringe, an icy container of fuel. Even the canned goods were made of ice. Nothing was spared. The architect was mocking us, taunting us with the illusion of sustenance, while slowly starving us, freezing us to death. This was psychological warfare, a calculated attempt to break our spirits, to erode our will to resist. It's a trap, Mallory said, his voice grim. We can't trust anything in this place. We left the storage room, our hearts heavy with despair. The station was becoming a frozen labyrinth, a twisted reflection of the architect's mind. The corridors were shifting, the doors were disappearing, and the ice was growing, consuming everything in its path. We were trapped, hunted, and slowly being driven mad. The world was shrinking around us, both externally and internally, and there was no escape. As we walked, it became clear that the seeds were not just a part of the station. We walked through some doors and found other doors and other doors and other doors. Each room became more and more filled with ice than the last. The entire station was one seed, one growing, throbbing seed. Then we heard a voice. Alistair, Eva, Mallory. It was a familiar voice, a voice we hadn't heard in a long time. It was Anya. We stopped, our hearts pounding in our chests. The voice was coming from somewhere nearby. It sounded faint, distant, but real. Anya, I called out, my voice trembling. Is that really you? The voice didn't respond, it just repeated our names. Alistair, Eva, Mallory. We followed the voice, moving cautiously down a darkened corridor. The air grew colder, the shadows grew darker, and the ice grew thicker. We reached a door and stopped, our weapons raised. This was it. We were about to confront Anya, or rather, what was left of her. Mallory nodded, then kicked the door open. Inside, the room was empty. There was nothing but ice. Then we heard the voice again, coming from behind us. We turned around and saw that the corridor had shifted. The door we had just come through had vanished, replaced by a solid wall of ice. And standing before us, bathed in an eerie blue light, was Anya. Her face was blank, her eyes vacant, her skin the color of ice. But she was speaking, and she was smiling. The voice was a haunting, horrifying parody of the woman we knew and loved. The seeds that we breathed in were trying to show us the way. Come, Anya said, her voice a hollow echo. Let the architect consume you. There was a low rumble beneath the ground, like a growling animal. Were we in more danger than we thought we were? It felt that we had made a terrible mistake. We had gone too far, and now we were going to suffer the consequences. We could only hope that we weren't too late to save what was left of us. This was it. What do? We have to make it count. I turned to look at the others, but there were more than the people I had known. I saw copies of them. Dozens. Then 100. The architect can make as many of those things as it wants to. This world may be over sooner than we expected. Chapter 10. Echoes of Deceit. The vision of 100 ennies, 100 fractured reflections of a life lost, nearly broke me. It was a cruel jest, a testament to the architect's power to manipulate and corrupt. The illusion was a weapon, a psychological assault designed to shatter our resolve, to break us down and make us accept our fate. "It's not real," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "It's a trick." The Anya in front of us smiled, her icy features twisting into a grotesque parody of a comforting expression. "Believe what you wish, Dr. Fairbanks. Reality is what the architect makes it." The copies of Eva and Mallory began to surround us, but I looked at Eva and she seemed unsure. They looked more real than the other ones. We were now facing a choice that might save us or kill us. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. "We're not afraid of you," I said, my voice gaining strength. "We won't give up." Mallory nodded in agreement, his hand tightening on his remaining grenade. Eva had been here before. She knew better than I did. We fought our way through the horde of ice, our weapons tearing through the frozen forms. Each strike brought a spray of icy shards and a brief, high-pitched shriek, echoing in the enclosed space. It was a brutal, desperate battle, a struggle for survival against overwhelming odds. As we fought, the Anya in front of us remained, its icy gaze fixed on me. It didn't attack, it didn't move. It just watched, its presence a constant source of unease. It felt as if the architect was observing me, studying my reactions, waiting for me to break. Suddenly, one of the Eva copies lunged at Mallory, tackling him to the ground. Another one attacked Eva and they were both down. They were swarmed by the ice figures. They were not going to get up from this. It was now down to me. I looked at the ice. It was a swirling, moving beast, and I knew it would never stop, so it would be up to me to stop it. I grabbed my own hands. I knew that I had to accept what I had become. I would sacrifice myself for the others. And with a final look, I pushed myself to the point of no return. With a final, defiant scream, I threw myself at the icy Anya. I wrapped my arms around it, pulling it close. The ice was cold. It was overwhelming. I looked for any moment of warmth, any emotion, but all that was left was ice. I held the icy Anya in a death grip, and then Mallory grabbed the grenade that was on him and he threw it. The resulting explosion destroyed everything. A bright light, followed by darkness. When I regained consciousness, I was alone. The chamber was in ruins, the air thick with dust and the stench of ozone. The ice had shattered, the copies had vanished, and the architect's presence seemed to have receded. I was hurt, I was exhausted, and I had no idea where I was, and if Mallory and Eva were still with me. I pulled myself to my feet, my body aching, my mind reeling. The station was a labyrinth, the corridors shifting and changing, the exits disappearing. I was lost, isolated, and the echoes of the architect's deceit still lingered in the air, whispering in my ear, preying on my fears. I didn't know if I was able to go on anymore. I wanted this to end. I wanted to rest. I wanted to feel safe. But I knew I couldn't give in. I had to find Eva and Mallory. I owed it to them, to Anya, to everyone who had been lost. I had to find a way to stop the architect, to break free from its frozen grip. I took a deep breath, steeling my resolve. I picked up the fire axe and started to walk. The journey ahead would be difficult, dangerous, and the architect may be waiting. I just didn't know where to go, but I couldn't afford to be frozen in fear. I couldn't afford to stop. I began to walk, following the echoes of the architect's lies and hopping to find a way to stop the cold. Chapter 11. The Whispers of Vostok. I stumbled through the ruins of the station, my senses on high alert. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the howl of the wind and the creaking of the ice. The corridors shifted and twisted, disorienting me, leading me in circles. It was as if the architect was playing with me, leading me on a wild goose chase, testing my endurance. The architect knew I couldn't win. I had to keep going, but going where? Any direction was useless if I kept repeating the same moves over and over and over. I stopped. I looked around and all that I could see was ice, but there had to be something to help. I had been following my feet, but this had to end. My body aches and pains would all be for naught if the architect was leading me anywhere. I sat down, I closed my eyes, and I started to picture how everything had changed. I started to hear the sounds of the ice shifting, sliding, morphing. And then a memory came to me. Before the station had turned into a frozen hellscape, I remember where everyone had worked. I remembered Anya's obsession with Lake Vostok. Maybe that was the answer. I had to figure out a way to get there, but how would I even get there? I remembered one thing. Before, I used to walk through the engineering room. Then I would use some of the old tunnels to access the facility. Maybe that still exists. I pulled myself to my feet. I had a direction now, a purpose. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep me going. I retraced my steps, navigating the shifting corridors with a newfound determination. I had to find the engineering room. I was determined to find a way to access Lake Vostok. I tried to forget all the monsters and ice and visions. It wasn't over, but it was coming. As I reached the engineering room, there was nothing left. The machines had been frozen into place. There was no power, nothing that could help me. I screamed to the heavens, asking why I had been given such a curse. But I realized there was no use. Crying and lamentations meant nothing. As I kept walking around, I found a map of the station. It was still in one piece. The symbol was on this map, but there was something that had been covered up. Lake Vostok was a part of the diagram, and I could use that to go there. I looked at the map for any secrets, any hidden passage, anything that could possibly save us. The map seemed to point to one specific direction. The boiler room. That was strange, I thought. The boiler room didn't connect to any of the tunnels. Maybe it was hidden or covered up by something. I turned to head towards the boiler room. I reached the entrance, grabbed my fire rakes and prepared for battle. I swung the fire rakes and the door went flying open. I was now ready for battle. There was nothing in the room at all, but I did see one thing. In the corner was a drawing. It was of what I looked like, but an icy version, and next to it was another drawing. One of all of us with a monster on top. The architect seemed to mock me and I started to scream. But then I went silent because I realized that was the architect wanted, to get into my head. I looked for more. Was there any way to escape? I noticed that the drawing didn't have the monster. Why was that? As I thought about that, I remembered what I had done before I was trapped. I kept a journal. I always wrote in it no matter what. And when I was done with it, I threw it into the boiler. Maybe, just maybe, it still exists. There was only one way to see. I opened up the boiler and I saw it. My journal. It was half-burnt and nearly unreadable, but I could tell that it was mine. The architect wanted me to not find that journal, so it had to be something important. But what to do now? I picked up the book and brushed off the ash. There was only a little bit that could be read. I used to write in code. Maybe the code could help. I pulled out a blank sheet and started to translate the code. It was then that I heard someone speak to me. "Alistair, what are you doing? You know you cannot stop the Great One." I turned around, and I saw myself. Chapter 12, The Fractured Self. The figure standing before me was me, or rather a distorted reflection of me. The ice had taken root. The same vacant expression, the same haunted eyes, but the skin was the color of frost and the form was subtly wrong. It was a fractured self, a manifestation of the architect's influence. It smiled, a cruel parody of my own expression. "You understand, don't you, Alistair? The cold, it is inevitable. It is the future." My heart pounded. It was Ben and it was Mallory. It was me, but not me. It was the architect wearing my face, using my voice. It was a confrontation with my own potential for corruption. "You're not me," I said, my voice trembling. "You're a lie." The icy reflection tilted its head. "Am I, or am I simply the truth of what you are capable of? The architect can show us that. The potential is there. The cold can bring us peace. The cold can bring us power. The cold can erase this world's flaws." I clenched my fists. "I won't let you." The icy reflection chuckled, a hollow sound that echoed through the boiler room. "You have no choice. You are already changing. The icy presence already exists within you. The cold is already a part of you." I reached for the fire axe. I was tired, I was weary, and I didn't have it in me to fight anymore. I was done. I was ready to give up. "You have to die," it said, "for the world to be safe." I swung the axe, aiming for the reflection's head, but it dodged the blow with an unnatural speed, its icy form shimmering and shifting. It grabbed the axe and slammed it into the wall. The wood splintered. The cold surrounded me. As I stood there, I heard it again, in my head. It was the echo of what I was trying to do. This wasn't the way. And then another voice, and it was Eva. "Alistair, don't listen to it," she shouted, her voice echoing from the tunnel. "Fight it, you can do it." The words were a lifeline, a spark of defiance in the encroaching darkness. I looked at my reflection. I saw all the lies, the corruption, the sadness. I looked at my own life, all the pain and agony, and I knew with a crushing certainty that she was right. But if the architect was already a part of me, was it already too late? "It is," the icy reflection said, as if reading my thoughts. "You are almost one of us. There's nothing you can do to stop it. Let go. Embrace your new self." I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. I had nothing. I lost everything. I gave everything, and it wasn't enough. I opened my eyes and I saw the reflection staring back at me. I looked down at the journal. I saw that it had just a few things written in it. I saw a key, I saw a symbol, and I saw the words, "Find the source." But I didn't know where to start. Then I knew what I had to do. I reached out and grabbed the icy figure and I closed my eyes. I had to stop it. I had to win. And with that I grabbed my reflection. We merged. Our thoughts, memories, and desires came together. I saw everything. Then I did it, and as I looked at what had occurred, I screamed. A single, guttural scream. Chapter 13. The Source Unveiled. The merging was a violation, a searing intrusion into the core of my being. My memories tangled with distorted reflections, my desires intertwined with cold, alien impulses. I felt the architect's power surging through me, its icy tendrils probing my mind, seeking to claim me entirely. But within that chaos, I also saw its weaknesses, its fears, and the key to its destruction. The architect wasn't just a force of nature. It was a consciousness, a being of immense power but also of profound vulnerability. It feared the warmth, the chaos of life, the unpredictable nature of free will. It craved order, control, and the cold embrace of absolute certainty. I understood now that the architect was more than just a thing. It was a fear that spread to others and had to be stopped. The visions flooded my mind. The architect's origins, its ancient history, its relentless quest for domination. It had been dormant beneath Lake Vostok for millennia, a seed of ice waiting for the right moment to awaken. The tremors, the anomalies, Anya's obsession, they were all part of the architect's plan to lure us in, to exploit our curiosity, to use us as pawns in its grand design. I saw what it wanted. As I separated from the icy reflection, I felt a surge of newfound strength, a clarity of purpose that cut through the lingering fog. I knew what I had to do. I had to go to Lake Vostok. I had to confront the architect at its source. The boiler room was gone. It was the portal, the destination. I knew what I had to do. I remembered what I had written in my journal. Those coded thoughts were the key. I had to use them to break the architect's hold, to shatter its illusion of control, to unleash the chaos that it so desperately feared. The architect feared warmth. I looked at the fire rakes. Maybe warmth and fire were the key to win this. I saw a vision of the facility as well. The path wasn't that far, but it was filled with the ice monsters. I also saw the facility in my vision. The source was the giant machine. Then, with my final act, I started to act. I grabbed the fire axe and I was ready. I opened my eyes and I saw the monster standing at the door. And then Eva appeared. Eva punched the icy copy and started to go to town. "Alistair, go on without me. I'll hold it back as long as I can," she said. "You're sure?" I asked her. "Just get going. I have a feeling you'll have to stop this by yourself." I nodded. I closed the door and ran. I had no idea what to expect from this point, but I had to keep going. Eva wasn't there to help me, so I had to do this by myself. As I came across the corridors, I heard voices. I heard cries. I knew what the architect was doing, so I had to focus on where I had to go. I came to the engineering room. The machinery was all there, frozen into place. The machine that I had to get to was below the floor, but the floor was all ice. I used my fire axe and started hacking away at the ice until I reached the engineering area, and as I stared into it, I could see the water. It wasn't the frozen horror that I had come to fear, but water that was still clean. And a monster was standing right in front of me. I knew that I had to move. I turned around to run, but there were walls of ice everywhere. The architect wanted me to drown, so what to do now? The voice in my head said, "Jump in." And I jumped in. As I fell into the water, the icy cold began to overwhelm me. But I also knew what I had to do. I knew where I was going. I had to dive deep. And with that, I dove deep into the water. As I swam, the cold was nothing. I had to stop this. I had to survive. I had to become something more. And then I reached it, the monster. Chapter 14, The Heart of Ice. The water was frigid, a biting cold that clawed at my skin, numbing my senses. I plunged deeper, driven by the singular purpose of reaching the source, of confronting the architect at its heart. The darkness was absolute, the only light filtering down from the surface, a faint glimmer that grew smaller with each stroke. The pressure mounted, squeezing my lungs, threatening to crush my chest. As I descended, I began to see strange formations in the water, crystalline structures that resembled frozen coral reefs, glowing with an eerie, internal light. The architect was here, its influence permeating the very depths of Lake Vostok. It was changing reality and all that was with it. Everything that I had known was a lie. And I was still seeing the reflection of myself. It was mocking me. I had to keep fighting. I screamed at it, but it didn't stop. It just kept mocking me. "Do it. You have to stop this. Do it." Then I saw it. The source. It was a massive, crystalline structure, towering above the lake bed, its surface shimmering with an intricate network of veins like a frozen heart. It was larger than I had imagined, its presence dominating the underwater landscape, exuding an aura of immense power. A creature was guarding this area. Everything was connected. And that creature wasn't the thing. It was Mallory. He looked at me with a blank stare, his eyes devoid of emotion. The architect was controlling him. The architect was going to break him, but Mallory gave everything he had. But it wasn't enough. Not now, not ever. I swam for it, my heart pounding in my chest. The architect was waiting. I prepared myself. I grabbed the fire axe and was ready to strike. He came at me, his fist flying through the water. I blocked it with my axe. The creature had unnatural speed and power, and it was all coming from the architect. He slammed me into the ground. I kicked him off me. I needed to keep pushing. I was not going to let the architect win. I stood up. He grabbed my arm and was ready to swing again. I ducked, the punch hitting the surface of the water. I spun around and kicked him in the stomach. It worked. The architect couldn't anticipate this. I was in control of the situation. He recoiled, and I took this opportunity to strike. I grabbed my fire axe and put all my weight on it. I swung with all my might and then I crashed it into his head. He released me, and I watched as he drifted to the floor, his body lifeless. I stood there gasping, and I was ready for what would happen next. I had been called for this mission, and here I was at the precipice. I turned to face the crystal. The hum grew stronger, more oppressive, and I knew that I had to focus. This was my time. I had to stop the architect. I swam to the center of the heart, and as I did, it came. The reflection. It came with the monster. I wasn't ready for this. All this fighting, all the screaming, it just felt pointless. I was going to die here. The reflection was looking down at me and began laughing, but then I got angry. I did what I had to do. I grabbed the monster and turned him into ice, but it wasn't enough. The reflection was still ready to taunt me. "Goodbye, Alistair. You were never supposed to be here." I took my axe and slashed it. The reflection was broken. But he wasn't gone. He was now one with the machine. He would be a part of this. As I looked into my eyes, the darkness overwhelmed me. But as I saw that, I remembered what I was fighting for. And I was going to fight for everything. I was going to fight for all the people that had died for me. And with a final act of defiance, I put all my weight into the crystal. And then there was nothing. Chapter 15. Echoes of a Thaw. Silence. A profound, absolute silence. The hum had vanished, the cold had receded, and the crushing pressure of Lake Vostok seemed to lift. I was floating, suspended in the darkness, my senses reeling, my mind struggling to comprehend what had just transpired. Had I succeeded? Had I destroyed the architect? Or had I merely been assimilated, my consciousness now a part of its vast, frozen network? The questions swirled in my mind, unanswered, leaving me adrift in a sea of uncertainty. The confusion was so complete, so overwhelming. This couldn't be it. I had to find out. I had to return to the surface, to know if the world was to be okay. I started to swim upwards, pushing through the water, my limbs aching, my lungs burning. The faint glimmer of light above grew larger, brighter, offering a beacon of hope in the oppressive darkness. I was so tired. I kept seeing the faces of everyone I loved. I broke the surface, gasping for air, my body shivering with cold. I looked around. The crystalline structures were gone, the frozen coral reefs had vanished, and the massive source was no more. The lakebed was barren, desolate, a testament to the destruction I had wrought. But there was a sense of peace now, a quiet stillness that had been absent before. Was everything going to be okay? I made my way back to the engineering room, my movements slow and labored. I needed to get out of the water to find some warmth to assess the damage. My head was swimming. It all came back at once. The architect had turned them all into monsters. I wasn't able to save them. I found a way out, but it wasn't the same way that I had come. No, what I found was a room, an observation room, and I also saw that the ice had begun to thaw. Cracks spread through the walls, water dripped from the ceilings, and the air was filled with the sound of melting ice. The change was subtle, gradual, but undeniable. As I looked around, I also saw them. Eva and Mallory. They were sitting in chairs, alive. Their faces were still pale and their eyes wide with shock, but they were alive. "Alistair, you did it," Eva said, her voice barely a whisper. "You stopped it." Mallory nodded, his expression filled with awe. It's over." I collapsed to my knees, overcome with exhaustion and relief. It was over. The architect was gone. The cold had receded, and those had been turned were no longer that. The facility was no longer in immediate danger. But as I looked around, I knew the scars would remain. We lost a lot of people. We had faced a horror beyond comprehension, and what was left of us had been changed. We could never return to our old lives, but the worst had ended. We needed to recover, to bury our dead, and to find a way to move forward. The three of us were going to figure it out. Everything was going to okay. Eva went to the radio and started calling for help. This is McMurdo Station. We have survivors. Mallory then told me, we have to clean this place up, but it's over. The world is saved. A small part of me knew this was the calm before the storm. But everything would be okay. We would make sure of it. And as I looked at what had come, I heard the voice of the architect. You may have won, Alistair, but I'm coming back. My influence runs deep into this world, so this isn't the end. This is the end of the beginning. There's always going to be ice. I am at the end. The end.